So, good evening, everyone. Welcome again to our webinar, our weekly webinar. Today, we will talk about turtles. We have Dr. Lindsay, and we have our special guest, Alex. So, thank you, everyone. Welcome again to our webinar, our weekly something on the feedback. It's okay. So again, we will talk again about turtles awareness. I would like to introduce before we start that we have some photo ID with us as partner. They are all responsible doing and helping us in the contents. And on a while, Lindsay and Alex, they will talk to us about what is photo ID and introduce photo ID to us. So, Lindsay.
Yep. I'm actually going to talk about it a little later on in my presentation, but while I have everyone here, I can just mention it briefly that we are looking for pictures of manta rays, whale sharks, and turtles. So for the manta rays, we would need a picture of the belly side of the manta ray. And for whale sharks, we need pictures of the side behind the gills of the whale sharks. And then for turtles, it's pictures of their face. So for whale sharks and turtles, we would need both sides, ideally. So if you could send those over to us, we would greatly appreciate it, because then we can uniquely identify these individuals, which would be really cool.
So welcome. So today we will be with you, Lindsay. Tell us about the turtles, and we would like to know more about turtles.
Sure. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with me so you can see your presentation. All right, so I'm gonna talk about marine turtles in the Red Sea today. But before I start, I do wanna thank my entire lab, the Reef Ecology Lab at KAUST. I started at KAUST in 2017 with my master's, and I'm currently I'm not quite a doctor yet, but I'm in the process. I'm doing my PhD at the moment. So I really needed to thank my entire lab for helping me organize the field work and going out in the field and doing that work. And then for the audience, I did want to let you know that I have different parts of my presentation today, and we'll be pausing and answering questions in between these different sections. So I'm going to start off by talking about turtle biology, and then we're going to transition into turtles specifically in the Red Sea region, and then move on to what my research focuses on, which is nesting ecology, movement ecology, as well as assessing threats to sea turtles. So just so everyone is kind of on the same page about with their knowledge on sea turtles, this is the anatomy of a green sea turtle. Sea turtles are reptiles, and they're extremely well adapted for a life suited in the sea. That means that their carapace, or their shell, is very hydrodynamic, so they're able to swim through the water very well. In addition, turtles are cold-blooded, meaning that their internal temperature varies according to their ambient environment. Just like us, they also breathe air. At rest, they're able to stay underwater for a maximum of around 7 hours, but typically when they're moving around more, for example, when they're foraging and eating, then they breathe every 3 to 5 minutes or so. The fact that they breathe air actually makes them vulnerable to a few things. The first which is boat strikes. Because they're coming to the air so often, they're at that air-water interface. So it's pretty easy for them to get struck by a boat. And because their lungs are right underneath their carapace, it's pretty easy for those to get punctured by the motor of the boat, which is pretty unfortunate. Also, since they're at the top of the water, that's where a lot of abandoned ghost nets are. So it's pretty easy for them to get trapped in those. And because they need to breathe, they unfortunately can drown. So that's 2 threats. In addition, I just wanted to point out that we are able to tell the sex of the sea turtle by their tail. So in this drawing by my lab member Irene, you can see that it has a pretty small tail here. And if this was an adult sea turtle, this would indicate that it's a female. In this photograph, you can see over here of a turtle from underneath it. You can see that the tail is pretty wide and long. This would indicate that it's a male sea turtle. In addition, males oftentimes have a bigger claw on their front flipper, and this is just to help them hold on to the female's carapace during mating. The carapace is made out of several scutes. These scutes are made of keratin, and in some species of sea turtles, the scutes are actually going to shed each year when the turtle grows. This isn't true for all turtles, but it's true for green sea turtles like this one. So there are 7 existing species of sea turtles, and I added pictures of them so you can see them here. There's only 2 species that are not found at all within the Red Sea, and that's the flatback turtle and the Kemp's Ridley. So this first turtle, the flatback turtle, is found only in Australia, and not a lot is known about it. As you can see here, it is the International Union on the Conservation of Nature has said that it is data deficient, and therefore they haven't been able to establish that it's even endangered or how the population is doing, just because we don't know anything about it. Another species that we do not find here in the Red Sea is the Kemp's Ridley, which is seen in the upper right here. This one is found in the Gulf of Mexico and east coast of the United States. In the Red Sea, we have had occurrences of loggerheads, olive ridleys, and leatherbacks, although they're definitely not common. This loggerhead here is more common in the Mediterranean, and it can be easily identified by the large head and strong jaws. They eat a lot of hard animals such as crabs and mollusks. That's why they have such big mouths. Second is olive ridley. They're famous for, of course, their olive color, and they're also smaller in size. There has been one occurrence of them nesting here in the Red Sea over in Eritrea, but again, it's not very common at all. Next, I'm talking about the leatherback sea turtle, which is the largest of all of the turtles. And they're unique because they don't actually have a hard carapace like all the others. The back of their shell is covered with a hard skin, hence its name leatherback. They can get to be the size of a golf cart, so they're absolutely massive. I've never actually seen one, but it would be absolutely a treat to be able to be in the water with one of them. Lastly, we're going to talk about the endangered green turtle and the critically endangered hawksbill turtle, because these are the ones we're going to see more often in the Red Sea. I'm going to talk a little bit later about how to identify the differences too, but I just wanted to introduce to you guys the 7 species. So all of these 7 species share some life history characteristics. They start off as hatchlings, and they emerge from their nests at nighttime. So the nests are on land, so they'll emerge usually after the sun sets all the way until sunrise. And what they're going to do is get to the top of the sand and run as fast as they can to the ocean and then straight out into the open sea. During this time is when the predation is highest on these guys, because they're small and their carapaces aren't hard yet, so they're very vulnerable. Things like crabs, birds, some lizards, and sharks all predate upon these little guys, and only 1 out of 1,000 sea turtles makes it to adulthood. So the mortality is very high. After they make it out into the open ocean, they're usually hiding in algae. And at this point, they're eating food like plankton, like jellyfish. And not much is known about this time of their life. It's what scientists refer to as the lost years. And this is because we're not really able to tag a hatchling that's so small. So we can't really follow its movements or understand what it's doing at this period. But we do know that it stays into the open ocean until it's a juvenile, which can take maybe 5 to 10 years. When they become juveniles, they're going to make a pretty long migration to their foraging ground. So this is dependent on the turtle. They don't all go to the same place, but green turtles will generally go to a seagrass meadow, and other turtles that need coral reefs will go to these habitats. And this is where they're going to live until they reach maturity, and maturity can be anywhere from 10 years of age to 50 years of age, depending on the turtle species. Upon maturity, they're going to migrate once again, but this time they're going back to their natal beach, the beach where they were born. So turtles exhibit what's known as natal homing. So they're able to use, actually the mechanism of how they find that out isn't yet established, but it's probably something to do with using the magnetic system to find out that beach where they were originally born. And then the female will lay her eggs, and she'll lay her eggs at night and can lay anywhere from 80 to 130 eggs at a single time. When she lays these eggs, it's known as a clutch. And these eggs, for green turtles at least, are about the size of a ping pong ball. And they're going to incubate for about 50 days until they until they emerge from the nest. Do I have any questions about so far, or are we doing okay?
Still, you can still.
All right, I'm going to continue talking about some threats.
Yeah.
Great. So one obvious threat is direct overexploitation from humans. So this includes poaching of turtles for their shells, meat, and eggs. So this photo right here was taken in Malaysia, where it's legal. It's totally allowed for people to go to the markets and buy sea turtle eggs. And other regions of the world will eat the meat and skin. So obviously that's a pretty big problem. Another problem is habitat disruption, which basically is the loss of their nesting or foraging grounds. As you can see in this image here, in the Maldives, this nesting beach was completely paved over for an airport. So the nesting mom will, because she has natal homing, she's going to go back to that beach no matter what. And she'll exhaust herself trying to dig a hole, but unfortunately she obviously can't because it's on tar now. So that's another huge issue for turtles worldwide. And another one is pollution. So this includes many things such as entanglement. A lot of fishing gear can get lost at sea. We call these ghost nets. And they're a risk to a lot of animals. And as I mentioned, especially animals who need air to breathe because they'll be at the surface quite a bit. Plastic pollution, we'll talk a little bit about this later, but this is a problem for marine animals worldwide. They can ingest it, get stuck in it. We'll also be talking about heavy metals a little bit later. So these are pollutants that come from industry. So we did have a question. Is it okay if I address it? It's
we have one from Amr Gusty. How many eggs do the turtle lay? What is the depth of the pit?
All right, thanks for that question, Amr. How many eggs do turtles lay? So it depends on the species, but it can be anywhere from 80 eggs to 130 eggs. The average, I would say, is around 100. And what was the other question? Oh, how deep? This also depends on the species. So the bigger turtles, such as the leatherback, can definitely dig deeper pits. But I would say the average in the Red Sea of green turtles nests are 50 centimeters and hawksbill nests are around 30 centimeters of depth. Good question. Okay, I'm gonna continue on with my presentation. All right, so turtles have survived since the late Triassic period, over 200 million years ago. So obviously they've been able to adapt to past climatic changes, but the current rate of change is unprecedented. The IPCC, the International Panel of Climate Change, predicts that temperatures can rise by over 2.6 degrees within the next century. And this can be seen in this graph over here, which predicts the temperature rise in different scenarios. So you can see that it has a maximum of 4 degrees rise and minimum of maybe 1 to 2 degrees. Temperature has many effects on sea turtle biology. And this is because the temperature of the nest where the eggs are incubate affects the incubation duration, so how many days that the eggs are incubating, as well as the growth rate and how fast the embryos are going to grow. They're also going to affect hatchling morphology. So as you can see in these pictures over here, these hatchlings have abnormal scoot mutations, and this can definitely affect their fitness and how fast they're able to run and swim. In addition, the temperature will affect the success of the hatchling. So how many survive overall during the nest incubation. And lastly, the temperature actually affects the sex of the hatchling, which I'll talk about now. So sea turtles demonstrate what is known as temperature-dependent sex determination. And I like to think about this as in females are hot and dudes are cool. So when the temperature increases and are really warm, there's going to be more females. And at cooler temperatures, there's going to be more males. So an important parameter to define is called the pivotal temperature. And this is the temperature at which there's a 50-50 sex ratio of males and females. For most species and geographic locations, the pivotal temperature is close to 29.2 degrees. For marine turtles, temperatures above this, as I mentioned, are going to be more females, and temperatures below this will be more males. Another important parameter to define is the transitional range of temperature, or the TRT, which is around 2 to 3 degrees centered around the pivotal temperature. And in this range, both males and females are produced. Above it, 100% females, and below it, 100% males. We want to get within that transitional range of temperature because we need both males and females for the populations to succeed into the future. I also want to mention that there is a range of successful incubation temperatures that is around 25 to 33 degrees, and anything above or below this can cause mortality. So we will actually discuss this a little bit more when I talk about Red Sea temperatures. Next, we're gonna start talking about the species specifically in the Red Sea. So when you're out diving, the two most common turtles you're gonna see are the hawksbill and the green turtles. So it's pretty important, especially for photo ID, that I'm able to figure out which species the photos are in. So the most obvious way to tell is actually from the side by looking at the beak of the turtle. Hawksbill, hence its name hawk, will have a bird-like beak. It's pretty sharp and pointy, as you can see here, whereas green turtles have a more round and bulbous face, as you can see here. Now, if we have pictures from the top of the turtle, we're able to count what's called the prefrontal scales, which are the scales in between the turtle's eyes. Hawksbills will have 2 pairs of prefrontal scales, whereas green turtles have only 1. And green turtles are going to be the only turtles in the Red Sea with only 1 set of prefrontal scales. So that's a really unique character that helps us identify the difference. In addition, hawksbills are smaller than green turtles. So
is there any one of them dangerous or aggressive?
In nature, I wouldn't say that they're aggressive, but I think that if it thinks you have food in your hand, like if you're kind of taunting it with like maybe some algae or something, then there's a chance that they're going to try to eat that algae and maybe accidentally get your finger. But
what kind of food on my hands?
So green turtles like to eat algae. So in some places in the world, they'll feed the turtles for tourism, and they'll give them things like lettuce and seagrasses. But there's not a lot of tourism for turtles in Saudi Arabia, for example. So we don't advise feeding them because then it affects their natural foraging abilities. So hawksbills actually eat sponges and jellyfish. So that's what makes them also different from green sea turtles. So if you're watching these guys while you're diving, maybe you see that they're eating some sponges, that would give you a hint that is a hawksbill turtle instead of a green turtle. Do we have any other questions about these 2 species for now?
Oh, no.
Okay. So in the Red Sea, it's unique to several other ocean basins because the temperatures are pretty warm year-round. The salinity is pretty high too. And green and hawksbill turtles are known to nest actually throughout the entire coastline of the Red Sea in all of the countries except for, I think it's Jordan that they're not in. Egg exploitation and turtle shell trade do exist, although it's not super common. But I know that in some places, like in Egypt, the hawksbill turtle is oftentimes caught and the shell is turned into different trinkets and sold in the black market. So that's a pretty big issue for these turtles. There are national laws and international agreements that protect the turtles, but there is unfortunately we're lacking enforcement in these areas. So the illegal trade does still continue. in Saudi Arabia, for example, I was in the Alif region, and unfortunately, I found a green sea turtle carapace that had clearly been fished, and the meat was taken out and it was tied up. So I think that some people do continue to eat the meat, although I don't think it is super common as other places in the world. I also really need to note that there is a lot of data lacking in the Red Sea in comparison to nearby regions such as the Mediterranean and the Arabian Gulf. The Red Sea has very, very few publications on sea turtles, maybe 12 to 15. So there's a lot that we don't know about these turtles, which is why it's so important that we study them in order to conserve them in the future.
Okay, just a small question from Alex. You mentioned no nesting in Jordan, but is there any no nesting elsewhere in the Gulf or Aqaba?
I know that in like the beginning of the Gulf, like in Tiran Island, like right there, there's actually some of the highest nesting in all of the Red Sea. It's a really high density, but unfortunately, a lot of those places are owned by the military, so it's hard for me to go and study them. And like, I think Tiran
And
Island is off limits for both Egyptians and Saudis. Yep.
why sometimes we see the turtles die on land? What is the reason?
Yes. So on a lot of the islands, like offshore of Alif, there's a lot of dead turtles, and this is because it's usually the female's last effort to lay her eggs, and she'll give all of her effort to do so. And sometimes on the bigger islands, these turtles could actually get lost. And since it is so hot during the daytime, they can definitely lose a lot of their energy running around these islands and trying to find where they're going to lay. And if the sun comes up and they're still on that island, it's really likely that they can get dehydrated and end up perishing there. But a lot of those turtles that are out there, especially on like Dora Island, they look a lot older and larger, so it's likely that it's natural for them to die, and it was their last effort to kind of get out all those eggs, and then that's the end of her life.
So they only nest on a sandy beach?
That's right. So for the eggs to incubate, they actually need to bury them in the sand. So if it's a rocky beach and she can't actually dig a pit, she's going to keep on moving until she finds a very suitable, good spot with like few rocks and few coral rubble, so she can get her eggs pretty deep and safe.
Great.
Awesome.
Okay.
Okay. So there are two main categories of information that are lacking on sea turtles in the Red Sea. The first of which is knowing about their distribution, so where they're foraging and where they're nesting. And the second knowledge gap is looking at their threats. So what are the main things that are threatening these populations? This is crucial to know for management. So during my PhD, I hope to answer some of these questions. And to start off, I wanted to dig a little bit more into the nesting distribution. And to do this, I was using both the literature as well as drone surveys and nesting surveys to figure out where these turtles are. So because turtles have to nest on sandy beaches, we can look for their tracks and able to figure out if they're nesting there or not. So with the help of some of my colleagues, Amr and Royal, we droned a bunch of islands out in the Farazan Banks area, and we were looking for turtles. And it is pretty clear that there's a pretty large amount that are nesting out there. But in the literature, so these maps on the left are published by Mancini et al. In 2015, and the areas that we found nesting turtles in weren't in this publication at all. And same with the beaches and islands offshore of Kaus that we found nesting evidence on also were not located in this publication. So there's definitely more information that needs to get out there. That's why we're doing all these surveys to try to figure out where exactly they're nesting. In the past 2 years, we found nesting sites, yeah, as I mentioned, at Kaus, a few more at Yambu, in Rabik, and the Farazan Banks that were never published before. So that's why we were trying to do this study. And fortunately, using these drones, also known as unmanned aerial vehicles, we've been able to find quite a few nesting. So out of 18 nests and beaches that we surveyed, 10 of them had nesting evidence. Drones are super useful because they are pretty easy to survey an entire island um, compared to walking around this island. And then once we see that there is nesting evidence, then we can put that effort in to try to get to the island and figure out what species are nesting there. Most of these drone surveys were done on a few research cruises last year in the Farazan Banks. So you don't need to read everything from this table, but I'm just showing that there were quite a few islands not in literature that did have nesting evidence, which was quite exciting. In addition to these drone surveys, we did nesting suitability surveys. So this was on foot walking around the different islands, and we were recording how many tracks and nests we saw. So in order to figure out what species that the tracks belong to, we're able to use the shape of their tracks. So green turtles will actually walk on the sand with their front flippers parallel to each other. So the tracks you can see here, their flipper lines are parallel to each other and pretty close, and then their tail is dragged, so you can see a pretty straight line in the middle. Whereas hawksbills use one flipper at a time, so their tracks are more alternating, and they don't have as a defined straight tail line in the middle. So we use these cues as well as the size of the track, because on average, the green turtle track will be between 100 and 130 centimeters in width, and the hawksbills are a bit smaller. They're anywhere from 70 to 85 centimeters in width. In addition to figuring out how many tracks are in each island, we also wanted to measure some nesting suitability parameters. It's important to know why turtles nest on some islands compared to others, which is why we measured these parameters. In addition to surface temperature, we were looking at the slope of the beach, as well as the pH of the sand, and the distance from the nesting line to the water line and high tide line. And at some of the sites, we also collected sand samples. And with these, we were able to assess moisture and sand particle size, as well as color in the lab and compare later. And I just wanted to show you guys some preliminary results. These were just comparing the 4 islands in Alif of Dora, Jadir, Malatu, and Marmar. And we were able to find that Dora actually had the highest nesting evidence of all 4 islands. And as Amr mentioned, we do have a high number of dead turtles on this island. We counted 15, which is a pretty large number. Jadir, Malatu, and Marmar all have pretty similar counts of sea turtle tracks, nests, and as well dead turtles. Next, we wanted to look at what species were nesting on the islands, and using the width of the track, we figured out that Dora, Jadir, and Marmar all had green turtles just based on the track width. But Malatu, interestingly, had smaller tracks. They were all less than 74 centimeters, and the smallest was around 54, which is actually smaller than most hawksbills. So we have a chance that it could have been an occurrence of an olive Ridley, which I mentioned earlier. There's only one previous record of them nesting in the Red Sea. So I really hope that once Corona is over and everything, we can go back down to this region and start studying these sites more to figure out what species are nesting out there, because that's really important for us to know.
Alex is asking, do you think all 15 females were dead from the same season?
No, I think because I was able to go out there 2 or 3 years in a row, and each year there's a few more. So I was supposed to go out this past year, but with Corona that didn't happen. But we had spray paint, and we were going to get ready to count exactly how many new dead sea turtles die each year. But we haven't actually been able to establish that so far. Hopefully in the future we'll be able to figure that out.
Yes. And we just, okay, there is a northern Yamba. We found large numbers as well as an Umluj area.
Yes, that is true. I'll talk about Ross Breedy a little bit later, and there's some sites around Ross Breedy with pretty high nesting evidence. Hopefully I'll be able to do a little more drone surveying in the future, but for now I just want to focus on the Southern Red Sea because we're on the cruise down there, and then hopefully in the future we can get up into those other areas.
Is the tail the genital organ for male?
Yes, that is a good question. So the reason why the tail on the males are so big is because they actually have a muscle, so they can hold on to the females with it, and then it is also their genitals, so they'll also be able to impregnate the females with it. Another fun fact is that turtles are polyandrous. I don't know how to say that. One female can nest or can mate with several males at a time, or like per nesting season. So the hatchlings in a clutch could be half sisters and half brothers because they don't all have the same dad. They could have several different genetics from different fathers. Do we have any other questions, or should I move on?
No, we can continue.
Okay, fabulous. So next I'm going to talk to you about movement ecology. It's really important to understand where turtles are going and when, and able to understand the habitats they're selecting, their migration routes, how resident these animals are, and how they respond to environmental changes. So to do this, we have three main methods that I'll be talking about today on how to figure out where they're moving. And this is satellite tagging, flipper tagging, and photo ID. It's important to know this because turtles are large migrators. They can swim up to, the record, as I wrote here, is over 12,000 miles or 20,000 kilometers. And that was a leatherback turtle. So they make huge migrations. They can cross entire ocean basins. So in able to conserve these populations, it's not up to just one country. It needs to be several countries working together to protect their most important critical habitats, like where they're foraging and where they're nesting. That's why we need to know where they're going. There are also, unfortunately, to date, have been no publications on the movement of turtles from Saudi Arabia, although there have been some from Egypt and Oman. So in this first map here, you can see that the turtles were tagged on Zabrigad Island in Egypt, and there were 4 turtles tagged. And they basically went in all different directions. One went all the way north, one went south into Eritrea, and one actually crossed the Red Sea over near Ras Baridi in Saudi Arabia. So these are pretty international animals. They're travelers. Down here, you can see a map of turtles that were tagged in Oman. It's showing several different species. So in this, the gray turtles are olive ridleys that were tagged while they were nesting. The brown ones were hawksbill turtles, no, loggerhead turtles, and then the green ones were green sea turtles. And you can see that even though they were found nesting over here in Oman, they traveled all the way up into the Red Sea, in the southern Red Sea in Eritrea and Saudi Arabia. So how satellite tagging works is they are equipped with an antenna that you can see right here, and this antenna communicates with orbiting satellites. But the downside of that is that this antenna needs to be out of the water. So you can see that there's a little tag here on this turtle, and whenever she or he comes up to breathe, that antenna is going to stick out of the water a little bit, and during that time, it's going to be able to communicate with the satellites. This is really cool for us scientists because we can get almost live information on where the turtles are and where they're moving. Unfortunately, these can get pretty expensive. For the really accurate tags, they can cost well over $3,000. In addition, they don't last very long. Due to batteries and the fact that they can easily fall off the turtles, they might only last from 100 to 200 days. But they're really cool because if you put them on a nesting turtle, you can figure out exactly where she's going, where she migrates to after she's nesting, and usually it's to a critical foraging ground. And at this foraging ground, we can protect this, and that can really help our turtle populations because, as I've mentioned, they're pretty endangered, so we do want to do our best to conserve these species. Yes, so with this technology, we are also able to include temperature and depth sensors, which can give us really pull information about how deep they're diving to and the temperatures of these depths. Because the Red Sea, the temperatures are a lot warmer than the Gulf of Aden. It can be really clear using these temperature signals on when she leaves the Red Sea and departs if she goes out into the Gulf of Aden. Okay, and next we're going to be talking about flipper tagging. So flipper tagging is a form of mark recapture. So each of these flipper tags has a unique ID. So we have to keep really good records of which turtle is which. And then if, for example, you go to a nesting beach, you can flipper tag all of the females you find. And it takes a lot of effort, but if you did this every night, then you can go back the following year and see if you have returning females. And if you have information on the size of the turtles and how many eggs she laid, then you can keep really good records on how the carapace grows over time, as well as how many times she's nesting per season and per year. So you can get really useful information out of this. There are some drawbacks though, because these tags are kind of like earrings. So they can easily fall off if biofouling happens, like if barnacles grow underneath it, they can pop right off. So you do have to have some upkeep. So go back year after year. You tag both the flippers of the turtle. So if one's on, then you're able to know that it's the turtle. But if both balls fall off, then it's impossible to tell using these flipper tags. These are way more inexpensive compared to satellite taggings because the flipper tags cost maybe $1 or $2 compared to $3,000 of satellite tag, but the information definitely isn't as reliable or accurate because you have to see and read the tag.
So Alex is saying, so naturally, many more females are tagged than male since they are easily found at nesting site. But what do we know about how movement compares between males and female in general?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there is a huge research bias because the females are way easier to study compared to the males. For the males, you have to actually capture them. Scientists do what's called the turtle rodeo. So they'll be on top of the boats looking for the turtles and have to catch these turtles and then tag them on the boat and let the epoxy dry, and it can take maybe 3 hours. So yes, males have been tagged. And they've been able to find that actually, interestingly, most male turtles also go back to where they were born in order to mate. So a lot of them will make a pretty similar migration from their foraging ground to the nesting ground. Obviously, they're not going onto the beaches to nest, but they will hang out there during the nesting season. It's a good question. Any other questions?
No, we don't have it for now.
Okay, awesome. So next we're going to move on to what I'm really excited to talk about, which is photo ID. So photo identification is a low-cost technique that can be used to track a variety of wildlife, including sea turtles. What's exciting is that we don't actually have to remove the turtles from the water, so there's a lot less stress. And we can use photos from citizen science, like people like divers, the diving community, which can be really, really helpful. Photo ID can help us researchers learn a lot about animal movement patterns, the life history information, and the population demographics. And we hope that this work can help us figure out the important foraging grounds and migration routes in Saudi Arabia. So I really, really would love if any of you guys have pictures of sea turtles from your snorkeling or your diving to please send them our way. So we've got our Instagram and our email address here if you would like to contact us that way. But we also have a website, which you can be seeing here. So you can just scan this on your computer and it should take you right to the page where you enter information on sea turtles, and it'll ask you a bunch of questions. That'd be really useful. So photo ID relies on specific marks on the animal that doesn't change over time. Okay, so for marine turtles, it's going to be their facial scoops. So you can see in this picture here, this is the side of a green turtle's face. And we use a software. The one I use is called i3S. And you identify different points on the turtle. You keep it constant. So I do the beak, the upper eye, and the outside of the scales. And then it's going to identify all the unique spots within that area. And then compare it with all the database you have. So with photo ID, for example, this was two different turtle sightings found at Robeek, but it's actually the same individual, and we were able to tell that by the pattern of the scoop, as well as the barnacle, which you can see here on the carapace. So we use both facial ID or pictures of scoops if you have them for this photo ID technique. So as I mentioned, there are several species that we can learn about from photo ID. So in addition to turtles, there's also whale sharks and manta rays. So for all three of these species, we do need some information from you guys. For example, we would love to get as accurate as possible the time and date of these sightings, which can help us determine, the seasonality and when and where these species were. In addition, we need their location. An ideal would be a GPS or coordinate of where you saw these animals, but you can also tell us if it was at a dive resort or a specific reef name or town name is fine too. If you have any observations on their behavior, if they were feeding or in transit, or maybe even mating or resting or nesting. And then lastly, if you guys could give us a little bit of a size estimate. So you can use your friend who's diving next to you or a boat, for example, in order to try to determine how big it was. If you're not able to accurately guess, that's totally fine, but it's just helpful for us to know.
I have a question.
Sure.
Do male take care of the nest?
No, males or females actually have no parental care. So once the female lays her eggs and covers them up, she's never going to see her hatchlings again. They're on their own. So they're going to emerge and swim out to the open ocean and probably never see their mothers or fathers. So no parental care. I already talked enough about turtle photos, but just to reiterate, we would need pictures of both sides of their face if you have them. Pictures from the top of the carapace is super helpful because then we're able to identify the sex or maybe even any unique or prominent markings such as like barnacles or maybe cuts. And then I'm going to move on to the other animals. So there's another PhD student named Royal in the Red Sea Research Center who studies whale sharks, and she's looking for photo ID photos as well. For whale sharks, we need pictures from the left and right side of the whale sharks, right behind the gills. So for whale sharks, the spot patterns of their on their skin won't change after time, so this is what we use to identify them. We would also love to get pictures of the pelvic fin area so we can identify the sex. I think Jesse talked a little bit about this last week, but we are able to identify the sex by the presence or absence of claspers, which are seen here. And similar to turtles, we would also like any pictures of any markings or boat scars. Here you can see a bit of a scar from probably a boat on this individual. And lastly, for manta ray photos, we need pictures of the underside of the manta ray because we use the spot markings on their belly and able to uniquely identify them. This is for a master's student in our lab, Anna, who studies manta rays. So she would really appreciate if you guys have any pictures of red sea mantas so we can start getting some population estimates and figuring out their seasonalities. As the other animals, we also would love any pictures you have of any prominent or unique markings, whether it's scarring or like this one has some disfiguration. All right. If there's no questions, we can move along to threats. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a few different threats of red sea turtles. Sand temperature, plastic pollution, bycatch, and heavy metals. So for this slide, I wanted to talk to you about a project I worked on during my master's here. And I was looking at the sand temperature. So as I mentioned earlier, the temperature of the nest is super important for the well-being of the hatchlings. So in this project, I went to 5 different nesting sites in the Red Sea, and I buried temperature loggers at the average depth of hawksbill and green turtle nests, and then looked at what the temperature regime of these nests or of the sand was over time. Unfortunately, at almost every site, the temperatures were well above the pivotal temperature of 29.2 degrees, which suggests a skew skewed female populations. But in addition, the temperatures were above the thermal threshold of 33 degrees to 35 degrees, where mortality could be occurring due to the really hot temperatures. So at 3 of our sites, Wadi El Jamel, Ras Baridi, and Ali, the temperatures got pretty high to points that could be damaging to the population. But a lot of information isn't known. We don't actually know what the thermal threshold is here in the Red Sea. These turtles could be uniquely adaptive because it's been hot in this region for years. It's nothing extremely new. So future studies do need to look at that. And using these temperatures I measured, I used a maximum likelihood model to predict what the exact ratio of females were that were being produced. I'm not going to go too much into details here, but I did want to show you that at almost all the sites, there were nearly 100% females being produced based on this maximum likelihood model. But again, we don't know a lot of important parameters. We don't even know what the pivotal temperature of sea turtles is exactly here in the Red Sea. So I had to base this off research going on in other places around the world. No questions?
No.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to talk about some plastic pollution in the Red Sea. So these were pictures taken, this one was in the northern Red Sea area, and this one was in Rabik. And it's pretty clear that we do have a lot of plastic, larger plastic pieces along the Red Sea coast. But interestingly, we have less microplastics here in the Red Sea than in surface waters in other ocean basins around the world. And some scientists suggest that it's because of the lack of river inputs, the freshwater inputs in the Red Sea. We don't really have any rivers. Rivers in other parts of the world contribute a huge amount of plastic into the ocean. So we don't have like a major source, but we do have a lot of coastal debris which gets washed onto the shorelines. Microplastics are a huge issue in a lot of other places in the world. And these microplastics are just what happens when normal pieces of plastic break down from the sun, the wind, the waves, and they get crumbled into smaller and smaller particles. And these particles are easily digested by a variety of sea creatures. And unfortunately, a 2019 study actually found that microplastics were found within the digestive tracts of every single sea turtle studied in this project. And these turtles were from the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, and the Pacific Ocean. So it's a pretty big problem. I did want to quickly mention that we unfortunately found a deceased turtle right here at Kaus, and we decided to do a necropsy and find out the cause of death. And unfortunately, we found over 5 meters of nylon fishing line within its stomach. So it's going all the way throughout its digestive tract and actually wrapped around its arm. So even though I'm not talking about microplastics in that example, it's just another example of why plastic is harming our marine turtles, even here in the Red Sea. So I hope to do a future study. I actually collected a bunch of microplastic samples from different nesting sites in the Red Sea, and hopefully that information can be analyzed within the next few years to figure out how it compares to other nesting sites throughout the world. Another major threat for sea turtles is bycatch. So bycatch is the accidental capture of animals that are not the target species. So if you're fishing with a net and you're trying to get one particular species of fish, oftentimes you're going to get other animals as a mistake. So that's what we define as bycatch. Worldwide, this is a really big problem with sea turtles. And it's really important that we know more about bycatch rate here in the Red Sea and able to predict the impacts it has on the greater population. So in these pictures over here, you can see like a fishing net with so many green sea turtles in it. As I mentioned, they can drown if they're caught in the net. So if the net's not looked after for a few hours, then this can happen, and it's very unfortunate. There was a study in the Arabian Gulf that found an estimated 4,726 turtles were caught. So they found this out by doing surveys to the fishermen. So this year, me and the master's student, Kirsty, have compiled a list of questions to ask for fishermen. And we plan on asking them about of what kind of bycatch animals they get. If they get turtles accidentally, as well as dugongs and things like dolphins as well. So we hope to gather information. If any of you guys out there are fishermen and would like to answer any of my bycatch questions, I would really appreciate if you could fill out a questionnaire. That would be really helpful.
Second, is there any disease which can affect uh, especially turtles' rear flipper? Looks like paralysis.
I actually don't know a ton about turtle diseases, and I would say something that would affect turtles more would probably be something like plastic that would wrap around their flipper and make them not able to move. I think this is unrelated, but in other parts of the world, turtles have developed things like large tumors. But that doesn't lead to paralysis. That would more lead to them drowning or not being able to breathe well because it can get into their mouth. These tumors can grow all around their face.
And I have, are turtles' eggs harvested to eat in the Red Sea?
To my knowledge, where they're harvested is in the southern Red Sea in the Jazan area, but I haven't been able to do any particular studies asking these questions. But I do know that it is occurring, but not on a high level, not like other places in the world. I think it's mostly like small scale fishermen that are doing it to consume on their own, not really to sell.
When you lay eggs, it is soft when it will be hard. When it will be hard, and why it's soft when the turtle lay.
Okay, so when the eggs aren't really like chicken eggs. They're never going to get super hard. They're always going to be a little bit squishy. But when they're first released by the mother, they're definitely covered in a lot of mucus and they're super soft. And this is mostly so they can drop into the hole and have nothing really, they can't like break or anything because they're soft. They're able to conform. And so when the mother lays her eggs, they could drop anywhere from like 20 to 30 centimeters. And so if they were hard, that would be really bad for the baby turtles, but they're soft, especially for the first few hours after they're nesting. But as I mentioned, they're never going to get super hard. They just get a little more rigid.
Have you been able to account for tag loss and biofouling with photo ID data and similarity in features?
I'm going to see if I can read this question.
Who?
Okay, sorry, I was just trying to read the question. Have you been able to account for tag loss and biofouling? So I haven't been able to do this project long enough. For example, we haven't even started with the flipper tagging quite yet. That's something I hope to do, but in other regions, they do both photo ID and flipper tagging in order to account for that tag loss. So that's definitely something that we can incorporate here because it's so low cost.
How much time turtles can stay underwater?
Yeah, so it depends on the species as well as the temperature of the ocean because that affects their metabolism. But if they're completely at rest and like in their zone where they're kind of sleeping, then they can be underwater for 7 hours or so. Yeah. Good question.
Yep.
Okay, we'll move right along. We're almost finished up here. I did want to talk about heavy metal pollution really quickly. So in case you guys don't know, heavy metals are defined as having atomic weight and density at least 5 times greater than water. These heavy metals can be found naturally occurring in the environment, but oftentimes they're from an industry polluting the environment. Some of these heavy metals have been studied to specifically have toxic effects on reptiles. So as you can see here, these heavy metals can cause things like cancer, endocrine disruption, and different sort of disorders, which can affect sea turtles. So what I wanted to do was see what these levels of heavy metals were at 2 different nesting sites. So according to literature, Ras Baridi here near Yambu is one of the biggest green turtle nesting sites in Saudi Arabia. Unfortunately, it's located right next to a cement factory. So as you can see in this picture, there's usually a huge cloud of cement going right towards the turtle nesting beaches. So I thought that I would actually collect sand from the nesting depth there and compare it to what I thought would be a cleaner beach. So I compared it to Marmar Island, which is offshore and not really close to any big cities or any big industries. As expected, I did find that heavy metals were higher at Ross Buriti compared to Marmar. So this was a significant difference. But we did not find a difference between depth. So I was comparing surface sand to depth of 30 centimeters and 50 centimeters, which is the average depth of hawksbill and green turtles respectively. But for some reason, there wasn't a significant difference between those depths, but it definitely was higher at Ross Buriti. And I plan to do more analysis and look and try to figure out exactly what these heavy metals can be, how they can be affecting these sea turtles. So a past study in Ross Buriti actually found that the cement particles will gather on top of the nest while they're incubating, and this cement can harden and kind of create a bubble. And then the hatchlings, when it's time for emerge, have a really hard time escaping, and sometimes they get stuck and will end up dying because they're unable to get out due to the cement. So this factor is probably having pretty big effects on the sea turtle populations. And since it is one of the biggest ones, it's really important that we protect it.
Um, how long do they sleep and how often during the day?
It's hard to define sleep since they're never really completely turned off. Like their mind is never really shut off because turtles do have some predators, like sharks, for example. So they do need to be cognizant. So they can rest for several hours and then they need to eat the other time. So I don't know an exact number of how many hours they're resting versus foraging, but I do know that they're never really completely like zoned off from the world.
Okay.
Okay, and just one final slide. I know that talking about these threats can be a little bit sad and depressing, but there is hope for sea turtles. And especially within the past few years, I know a lot of people have started caring about the ocean and getting really into trying to help save the environment. So I just wanted to end off giving a few tips on what I suggest you guys can do and how you can help sea turtles and the ocean in general. So the first one is really obvious. It's just using reusable bags, water bottles, utensils, and stop using single-use plastic. As I've mentioned throughout this presentation, plastic's pretty bad for the environment. So I really just suggest trying to steer clear as much as possible against and invest in your reusable items. Another thing you can do is participate in dive or beach cleanups. Of course, right now Corona is going on, so this isn't going to happen. But maybe when this is all over, we can try to arrange a beach cleanup or something like that, and go and pick up our beaches or even the coral reefs when you're diving. If you can pick up some of the lines you see, that of where your seafood comes from. If you know where it came from, I think you're able to figure out if it's sustainable. Sorry, my internet's going out. But you're able to, if you know where your seafood's coming, then you know that it's not really participating in this bycatch and entanglement. Just make sure you're getting it from good sources. And the last thing is you can participate in research through photo ID. So just one last announcement of, and if you guys could send us any pictures you have, that would be awesome. Again, here's our account. It's redsea_photo ID.
Yep.
So thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. We really enjoy this tonight. I have a question from Kylie. What is the lifespan of a turtle? Any studies in the Red Sea compared to elsewhere?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Unfortunately, it's really hard for us to know a simple question like what is the lifespan of a sea turtle? And this is because you would have to know exactly how old it is at every life stage and maybe recapture it at a certain time. So you'd have to know, like, tag it when it was younger and find it like 100 years later. So a lot of scientists have made estimates, but there's actually no clear age of how old a sea turtle is. But the estimates say that they can get over 150 years old. Pretty cool.
Also, another question. Do turtle in each region have different special character traits between the same species?
That's a good question. So some things can be different, such as their size. For example, in the Gulf of Arabia, hawksbills are smaller than anywhere else. Scientists don't know exactly why that is. It could be the warm temperatures change their metabolism, so they're eating differently. So traits like this are different, but in general, they are pretty similar across species.
I have Bima Putra. She raised her hand. I will open the voice. I think she will ask to you.
Okay.
Yep. Bima. Hi. Hello. Hello. Anyway, okay, let's take another question. Okay, Bima. Hi.
Yeah, hello. Hi.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
Yep.
Okay, yep,
Yep.
I hear you.
Yeah. We hear you.
Yeah.
So you raise your hand for a question.
Hello.
Yes. Okay. Let's take another question. I think you have a technical issue.
Okay.
Is the age different between males and the females?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, unfortunately, I don't know a ton about their age. Actually, researchers in general don't know a lot about their age. So I don't actually know the difference between males and females. I'm sorry.
Which heavy metal had the highest concentration at each site?
Okay, so both of the sites actually were highest in iron. I actually didn't even include it on the graph because it was so high, so I had it on a separate graph. But yeah, for some reason, iron was really high, and I need to look into how that can affect the reproductive biology of these sea turtles, because right now I actually don't really know. Not a lot of studies have been done on that.
And the lifespan of male versus females?
Yes. Hi, Kylie. I'm really sorry. I think I said this a few times, but I just don't know the difference. I don't think anyone really knows the difference between the sexes and how old they get. It's a good question, though.
Yeah, Amr Gusti, he raised his hand. I
Okay.
think.
Hi, Amr.
Hi, Amr.
I think he's muted.
Hi,
Hi, Amr.
hi, how are you guys?
How are you, Amr? You're most
Good,
welcome with
good.
us.
Hey, how are you, Lindsay?
I'm great. Thanks for coming, Amr.
You're welcome. Can you tell us when is the season of the laying the eggs of the
Yes.
turtle?
Sorry, I totally forgot to mention that. So it's actually different based on the latitude of the Red Sea. So in the north, the nesting season is actually a little bit shorter. So for hawksbills, it's pretty much the spring, and for green turtles, it's the summer. Whereas in the southern Red Sea, since it's warmer, they're kind of nesting year round. So I've seen them nesting there in December, and I've seen them nesting there in June and July. So the range is a lot bigger, we think. But again, not many people have studied this. So this is just based on my observations.
Thank you, Amr.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And a question, have you had any photo ID matches for your turtles yet between regions?
That's another really good question. We actually haven't done a whole lot of analysis of between regions. Right now, I'm actually focusing specifically on Robbie. Earlier this year, unfortunately, I was going maybe twice per month, but we had to stop in March due to Corona. And we were finding a lot of turtles resighted, but again, that's the same site. So I was just looking at residency and trying to figure out if there's a peak time when we are seeing turtles. And at Robbie, for instance, we were seeing a lot more turtles in the summertime compared to the wintertime, but we only had been doing that study for a year. So it'd be really interesting when we're done with this to continue on and see how that changes, and also compare it to places like Jeddah and Kaust.
Is the size different between male and female? This is from Dr. Kulber.
do think that the males are slightly larger. Like when you're diving, you can see some huge males, but I don't know exactly what size they get up to, but most times they are larger. That's a good question. Unfortunately, for the hatchlings, all the hatchlings are born the same size, and there's no characteristics that we can use to distinguish the sex. So most scientists will actually have to kill these hatchlings in order to look at their gonads and figure out if they're male or female, which is why we don't exactly know the pivotal temperature or how many females versus males we have in the Red Sea. And that's why I was using a mathematical model instead of actually figuring it out.
Final question: if you could work anywhere in the Red Sea, if access were not issue, where you be? Is there any turtle hotspot you think you are missing?
Yeah, I would love to do studies on Tehran Island, or I think that's how you say it, Tehran Island, up in northern Saudi Arabia, because I think that might be one of the biggest nesting sites in Saudi, and I would really love to go and check out and figure out exactly what the nesting density is over there.
Lindsay, thank you so much. We enjoy. Thank you for everyone that they attend for tonight. Thank you, Alex, for helping Huff of Spring and supporting us. Thank you for Cash. I would like to remind everyone that we will have a weekly webinar. They can join us and on our Instagram and know all our schedule. We will update you what's our next. And that's it. Stay home, stay safe, and happy Eid for everyone. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, Rabia. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you, Lindsay. So see you next week.
Thank you guys. Thanks for joining.
See you next week. Thank you so much.
Bye.